And by the way, the number of times that your vocal folds do a wave like this together, that determines frequency. Because that makes the frequency of the sound wave. So if you know a little bit about physics, the sound wave is made up of frequency. Frequency is the number of waves in the sound wave. Anyway, that's like physics-y stuff that you don't really want me to talk about because it's so hard to understand. And for me. So I'm not the best person to explain it. All right, so Angela's going to sing a nice high note for us. No, Amy's going to sing a nice high note for us. Oh. So Amy's going to breathe in. And she's going to sing a low note. There we go. Thank you, Amy. And you'll notice that when we breathe, the vocal folds open in a bit of a triangle. Okay? So I'm the back of the neck. She's the front of the neck. She's the shield cartilage. Okay? And there are little cartilages that my hands are here. And they determine opening of the vocal folds and closing of the vocal folds. And all the cartilages help with pulling to lengthen the vocal folds and shorten them. So that's how you make pitch. That's how you make high notes and low notes. Mm-hmm.
So does your range depend on how far they can stretch either way?
You mean your vocal category?
Yeah.
Like whether you're soprano or mezzo? Yes, very, very good question. There are many determining factors in your range is kind of a tricky term because your range means, a range is a distance. It's how far you can go. And how far you can go is not always the same as what your vocal category is. Okay? There are some altos who can sing very, very high notes, whose vocal folds can stretch. And ideally, if you have a free instrument, and we're going to talk, when I say free instrument, I'm talking about muscularly, okay, in your neck, and the air moves freely, and the whole system is working. And when Kim Barber comes this afternoon, she's going to talk about the whole system a little bit more. When that's all moving freely, then everybody's vocal folds should be able to stretch far. Not everybody's vocal folds stretch as far as the next person. So yes, in a way, that is true. But there are many other factors. And the most important factor in determining category, and this is something that gets very subjective with different voice teachers. Some voice teachers will hear one thing, and another voice teacher will hear something else in that voice, and say, well, that's a tenor. And somebody else will say, well, I don't know if that's a tenor, it's a baritone. And we argue all the time. Thank you very much. We argue, especially with women. It's usually more obvious with men, but no. But the determining factor usually is the color of the voice. For instance, Amy, would you mind doing a demo from just a straightforward, just singing one note? I want to hear each of you sing one note. So whatever, just pick a note, a random note, and just sing it all.
Oh, me first?
Yeah, please sing. Good. Can you sing the same note? Okay. So they're two very trained voices, and they both know how to sing really well. They both have freely produced voices, but they had different color. Did you hear a sound that was a little lighter, a little brighter? Who was lighter or brighter? Angela. And a little darker, mezzo soprano, soprano. So Amy has a lower voice category. Angela has a higher voice category. And yet, Amy may be able to sing the same notes that Angela can sing. But the color and the timbre of her voice are determine what she should be singing. But that is such a loaded question, because for opera singers and for singers who are singing at a very elite level, it's very difficult to know what repertoire they should be singing. But in general, the lighter voices can sing higher. And then there's Cecilia Bartley, but And then in musical theater, that's a totally different thing altogether. And again, I'm going to talk about that a bit after lunch. Does that kind of make sense? Are there any questions about how your voice makes pitch? Highs and lows? No? Pretty straightforward? How am I doing here? I think I have until 10:40. Oh. Oh, really? Okay. Do I have 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, I do?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we didn't put
Oh, right, 10:05. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome. Yeah, but we have yoga next, so we'll do a little break before you. Okay. Because I didn't talk about registration, and that question leads into registration. Registration is chest voice and head voice. And I tend not to use those terms, chest voice and head voice, but they're very widely used, and so I will use them because they are generally recognizable by most people. Chest voice, many people feel, is the low sounds you can make with your voice. Head voice is the lighter, higher sounds you can make with your voice. In terms of the structure of your vocal folds, registration means what part of your vocal fold you are using. And by that I mean the bulky muscle part when you sing low, or the thin membrane vibration when you sing high. When you sing a high note, your vocal folds stretch, and they use that outer layer more than they use the bulky muscle, okay, to create the sound waves, to come together cleanly like that. That is generally heard as head voice, okay, that thin membrane muscle. It's a muscle, but it's a thinner muscle. And then when you sing lower, generally, that big, fat, bulky part of the muscle is vibrating a bit more, and that is what we know of as chest voice. Some people call it the heavy mechanism and the light mechanism. That's kind of my favorite term at the moment. But it's different cartilages are used to access those different muscles. So if you sing a low note, you could actually sing a low note with the thin membrane and sing a heady low note. Or use the big fat bulky muscle. So I sang the same note, but I sang it using different parts of the vocal fold muscles. Okay, and it just depends which cartilages decide or which ones you tell them to use with your mind. Okay, so chest voice, head voice. When you sing high, it's very difficult to sing with a chest voice because that bulky muscle has trouble vibrating when it's stretched that far. So in a classical bel canto training, okay, so any classical training you'd be receiving, and it's considered kind of legit, that's another word for it, legit style singing. You try to blend the use of both of those muscles. So if you're singing in your middle range, you try not to sing only chest voice, and you try not to sing only head voice. Just try to blend them and use both of them together. And that is another source of many people's controversy, because to some ears, one thing sounds better, another thing sounds better. To some ears, it needs to have way more head in the sound, and to others, for certain styles or genres, they think it has to have way more chest in the sound. The problem arises when we try to bring a certain register into a part of the pitch range where it isn't so easy for it to work. So it's most common when you hear the chest voice trying to rise up higher into the high notes, okay, as the vocal folds stretch. But you may have come across people who actually talk a little bit like this, who actually have a really heady voice in their speaking voice. Because it is possible. It's much more common to hear people like me who have a dominant chest voice. Okay, that tends to be more common, which I try not to do, but it comes in. That's more common. You hear people talking with a really heavy chest voice, and sometimes to the point of pathology where it's a problem for them. But there are people who have a dominant head voice too, who when they speak use mostly that little membrane. They don't use the bulk of their vocal, and they don't know how. And those are muscles. So the membrane is a muscle, the bulk is a muscle. They both need to be developed the same way you would develop, your arm muscles or your leg muscles. You'd have to work out, you'd have to build them up, you'd have to use them. Not only do you have to use them, but you need to stretch them, and you need to condition them. You need to teach them muscle memory. And so we try to think about using our vocal folds the same way we would train our body in any other way, the same way we'd want to build up a muscle. Strengthen it, but also condition it with teaching it how to work. Okay? So for instance, if you're running, you want to learn to run the right way with good technique so that you don't hurt yourself or injure yourself. Same with using our voices. So when we have our voice are two muscles working together, and sometimes one is predominant. That just means the other one may not be as strong, and it needs to get worked out. So somebody who talks like this with a predominant head voice, and there are people like that, and often they are singers, because often many singers are taught to use only head voice. Does anybody think that that's a good idea? Well, it's not a good idea if you ever want to sing a low note with any volume. Okay? Same thing if you ever want to sing a high note with any freedom. Because here comes the problem. When you try to stretch your vocal folds to get a high pitch, and that muscle, that bulk muscle, just can't move very far, we can teach it, we can strengthen it, and we can teach it to blend into the head voice muscle so that we get a blend on a high note like an opera singer would do. Amy, can you give us another high note? That's a blended voice. She's not doing warbly, light, heady tone, when she's not pushing a chest voice really up either. She's blending the two, okay? And that's what we learn to do in bel canto or classical style singing. We learn to blend our registers. When you have a break, it's kind of the same word like crack, right? It's not really a break. There's no such thing as a break. We call it a break, and you probably all know what I mean when I say break. But some people, they have a big break, right? And yodeling is a perfect example. Yodeling accentuates the break. I just be practicing my yodeling for the fall. So you have this like accentuated break. All that is your vocal cords are going back and forth from using the bulky muscle to the light muscle. That's it. And in aesthetically pleasing, accepted by society nowadays kind of singing, we like a blended voice. So we try to work both muscles and bring them together to work together. And I have a couple minutes, so I'll talk a bit about belting, because this brings me right into belting, from musical theater styles, pop styles, that kind of thing. We know now, and we didn't know for a long time, but when belting started, it started when theater-style singing came to be. And we didn't have amplification yet because they hadn't invented it yet. And up until that point, opera was the only form of, well, not the only form, but the only form of singing that had to happen with an orchestra. And the bel canto classical style of singing is completely, and again, Kim will be talking more about the whole system, but you learn how to create acoustics in your body to bring the sound to be able to sing over an orchestra. And that's the ultimate goal. That is the ultimate goal as a classical trained singer, is to be able to sing any volume, but to be able to be heard over an orchestra. And that's why we teach singing that way. Okay, so if you never plan to sing over an orchestra, you never need to know how to sing bel canto. However, you need to learn how to blend your muscles. And classical training is the best way to teach you how to do that. But there are lots of things about creating acoustics in your voice. When you heard Amy sing, you heard how her voice filled the room up. She wasn't blasting out a note singing super forte. That's just the acoustics of her voice that were making that happen. So anyway, my point. Where was I? Belting.